we start talking about our final day on Jude the Obscure. Okay, so a reminder, if you can, please turn your cameras on. I like to see your faces. It's really helpful for me in teaching, just to know that you're there and I can see you, etc. This is our final day. I warned you the book would turn very, very dark at the end, and it has done so. There were going to be spoilers all over the place if you didn't finish. So I'm sorry about that. There's nothing I can do in that regard. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll start talking about Jude the Obscure. So a couple words first. I want you not to forget to set up appointments with me if you'd like to revise your paper. And I wanted to say also that I tend to be available Wednesday and Friday. Let me add to that that Mondays I'm often available, okay? So if this coming Monday works better for you, contact me. Usually it takes no more than 15 minutes for us to really make a lot of progress on honing in on getting your close reading papers together. Another word, if you want to contact the Writing Center, I think it's really helpful. One thing I will say about contacting the Writing Center is that you probably want to show them my comments. It might be helpful for them to see what I've written. And remember that there are comments that I leave kind of in the side of Carmen, but also on the paper. If you scroll down, usually there are comments there too. Okay, so any questions about papers, which are due again on April 8th? I think that's right. Is it April 8th or April 4th? I'm not sure. Well, in early April, I think it's April 8th. Let me double check. So any questions then about any of the things about the papers? Of course, I have to do a Buckeye thing. April 8th, yes. So April 8th is the date. Okay, so any questions before we move forward? We're good? Okay, all right. Wow, I was kind of, I told somebody that I think that one of the reasons I'm feeling so sad lately is this novel has this impact on me. So I apologize for I apologize for subjecting you to it. What I thought I would like to do before we begin talking about Jude parts 5 and 6 is take a look back at one of the very earliest documents that we looked at. So if you remember, I'm really interested in humanism and dehumanization in this class. And I think that one of the things that we notice is that dehumanization tends to happen when either there is too strict an understanding of nature being predominant or too strict an understanding of society or culture being predominant. In other words, it requires some sort of balance in order for humanism to grow. And we'll talk about that as we look at these sections. But let me go ahead and pull up lines written in early spring. All right. So if you remember the poem that we began the semester with, by William Wordsworth. It has this sort of argument. Many of you, a few of you wrote about this very nicely in your close reading papers. It has this sort of argument that that the real problem with humanity is that we've gotten too far from nature. And nature has several different sort of synonyms or close corollaries. So for example, nature is closely connected to instinct, right? So in this novel, many people, like Sue says, she works off instinct. It means she's working off some kind of part of her nature as opposed to reasoning. So nature has several of these kind of close kind of synonyms. So here's how Wordsworth frames it, and I'm basically going to look at this stanza, which is the second stanza. Here, this one, and this one, the two times when he repeats what man has made of man. So he says, to her fair works did nature link the human soul that through me ran. Much it grieved my heart to think what man has made of man. So, and I think you remember in the early class, I sort of suggested that this man is different than this man. This human here is what we might call the social person, or the social man. I'm sorry about the gendered language. I'm just going to use it because it's what Wordsworth uses. It's stupid, but we're stuck with it. Okay. So the social man has made of what we might call the natural man. Right. So this is a major problem in the novel, that Jude and Sue, they strive to be their natural selves, who they kind of instinctively, intuitively, naturally are, but these social rules and ideas crimp them, okay? And this line here, line 21, is revised in another version that I might have given you. It can either say, if this be of my thought, if these thoughts may not prevent, or another one, something about his creed. I don't know, it's different in a different version, but I think the main point is the same. Have I not reason to lament? If it's true that nature does this stuff, if trees automatically bloom out and birds automatically socially get along, then have I not reason to be sad about what man is made of man? Okay, so I just wanted to remind you of this particular dilemma before we get started. That it comes all the way from the beginning of our course, and I think will follow us all the way to the end of our course. This problem of the tension between who we are as kind of human animals who desire things in the world, and who we are as social beings who make these rules and ideas in order that we might be able to have a society that functions in a way. Sorry, I'm going to save this so that I can put it up on put it up in the teaching documents. Okay, so I just wanted, any questions about that, about the way that I wanted to it dawned on me yesterday as I was reading the final section and rereading the final section, that many of the characters comment in ways that seem to me to be consonant with Wordsworth's ideas. So, all right, so let's get moving then on some of the things that we're going to talk about, and I have some questions for you and see how it kind of goes. All right, so last time when we left Jude and Sue, they were right at the point of, at the end of part 4, being free to be together. It seemed at that point that maybe things were going to work out for Jude and Sue, right? That Phillotson granted the divorce, or was open to granting the divorce. That Arabella had remarried, and it seemed that they would be free to follow their own course. And then at the beginnings of part 5 and 6, again, they've left to go someplace where nobody knows them. And the other poem I think that you have to consider here that we read this semester is John Clare's I Am. Because he says at the end of that poem, I long for scenes where man has never tread, right? Where I can be at peace. So there's this sort of idea that, and I'll talk more about this, how both of them are figured as animals or fools. So they're like very tender creatures and very vulnerable themselves, Sue and Jude, and they have to keep searching out places where they can be free of society's rules. Okay, so they go to Albricum initially, and then sort of move about. The elsewhere here sort of happens after this thing that happens with the trying to find work that won't expose them, and they were found out. Well, we'll get to that part. They were found out to people thought they weren't married, which was true. They weren't married. All right, so let's talk about Father Time. This is the beginning, close to the beginning. We have part 5, chapters 2 and 3 really cover the arrival of the arrival of Father Time, or Jude Jr. Or sometimes she calls him Jewy, which sounds a little bit weird to me, but that's sometimes she does. I'm going to go ahead and cover this part, which is on my page 223. So they received this letter from Arabella, and Arabella basically, well, she shows up at first because she's kind of still interested in Jude at one point, and then the thing that she doesn't tell him finally is that he has a son, and she wants Jude, and the son is coming from Australia, where her parents had moved. I guess the pork business moves all over from Mary Green to Australia, and then finally back to Christminster. And they're going to send Father Time back. She wants to send Father Time, or Jude Jr., to live with Jude and Sue. And then after the letter comes, Sue says they're trying to decide whether they're going to do this, and Jude immediately says, well, yes, we're going to take this child, right? And I think this is part of what we can call the kind of philosophy of Jude and Sue, which is that we are all responsible for one another. So the poor child seems to be wanted by nobody, Sue replied, and her eyes filled. Jude by this time had come to himself. What a view of life he must have, mine or not mine, meaning my child or not my child. I must say that if I were better off, I should not stop for a moment to think whose he might be. I would take him and bring him up. The beggarly question of parentage, what is it after all? What does it matter when you come to think of it, whether a child is yours by blood or not? All the little ones of our time are collectively the children of us adults of the time and entitled to our general care. That is excessive regard of parents for their children and their dislike of other people's is like class feeling, patriotism, save your own soulism, and other virtues, a mean exclusiveness at bottom. So I want to talk for a second about what philosophy Jude is talking about here. So basically, he's talking about a kind of social contract, right? This term comes initially from Jean-Jacques Rousseau and was very important to the framers of our Constitution and also the French Revolution, and also, I think, future socialists, right? And even reformer capitalists who are reformers, who believe that we have a social responsibility for everyone, right? So, so basically, the things that get in the way of seeing our interconnectedness with everyone, right? The kind of Wordsworthian, what he calls interfusion, or yeah, I think that's what he uses, this term interfusion in the prelude, this idea that we are kind of connected and fused with everything. What stands in the way of that are these kind of structures. And even though these are really wonderful structures in and of themselves, if they get to become too rigid, they stand in the way, according to this idea of seeing our social connected. And they are the nuclear family, right? And remember, nuclear here has nothing to do with the nuclear weapon. It means the single the atomic, the single, like the single family, the family that can separate itself from others, seeing it as a single atom as opposed to a whole connectedness to everything. The nuclear family, the church, the state, all of the laws, right? So this would include laws, national pride or patriotism, the class system, right? All of these things, while they're good in and of themselves, even I would say education, including we see in this novel, including the university system, right? Which keeps us from seeing that everybody is connected and the same. So these are things that stand in the way, according to Jude and Sue. Do you see how that happens on almost every level? On the nuclear family level, they are suspected of, I mean, nobody says they're bad parents. Nobody says they're bad people. Nobody says that they're not nice neighbors. What they say is they're not legally married in a church, which is true because neither of them wanted to go through that again. They couldn't bring themselves to do it, right? So the church, as we see, they will be kicked out of a job because there was this idea that they were sinful, living in sin, and so they should not be doing restoration work in a church. The state, the laws of the church, so that would include, like, for example, so in this time, if Jude had married Sue, then his land, if he owned property and only men were allowed to own property, it would not go to Sue, but at least it would have gone to Jude Jr. Do you see what I mean? It would have gone to one of the men in his clan. But without that, it goes back to the state. It just is sold off, and it doesn't go to anyone if he's not married, right? Or his nearest male relative. So I don't know if he has a near male relative. I don't think he does, but if he did. So in this case, I mean, in a sane world, it would go to his wife and then whatever. But in this world where women didn't have the right to own property, at least would pass that way. So you would think that there should be something like domestic partnership or something, but it's not available. So that there are these lies. National pride doesn't really come up in this novel, but he mentions it here, right? Patriotism, right? It's an exclusive meanness. So like what he means by that, by the way, a mean can mean not just not being nice, it also means small, weak, a small amount, right? So you could say I had a mean amount of coffee left, which means that there was not very much coffee. So it's a mean exclusiveness. It's a small-mindedness. So to say I matter, but not people coming from Honduras or El Salvador, because they don't really, they are not me. So that's a mean exclusiveness, according to Jude. And the class system, of course, we see how that plays itself out. All right, so, and then this, of course, this makes Sue wonderfully happy because, in fact, Jude sounds like a good student of Sue's at this point. When he says all this, so she's very, very happy and she's excited, and Father Time then comes. And I'm jumping around here just to give you little bits and snippets of these ideas about the way children and the idea of children figure in the novel. When Jude is speaking to Arabella at the fair, I'm sorry, when Sue is speaking to Arabella at the fair, and she already has 2 children of her own and is pregnant with a third, and is there with Father Time, or Jude Jr., which is really a problem, is really a tense moment, because he's got both his adopted mother, or his whatever his, I mean Sue, and Arabella, his birth mother, both there. And Sue says, because Sue can't keep herself from being honest, I can't help but think that it's a terribly tragic thing to bring beings into this world. So this is something a lot of people think about. I thought about it before I had kids. I mean, I didn't think I was going to have kids. I'm an older father. I didn't have kids until I was in my late 30s with one, and I was 41 when my son was born. So it's a thing to think about, and it's something that these characters think about. And then, of course, I'm going to read this section. This is so sad. This is the section in part 6, chapter 1, when they arrive in Christminster, and they're horribly poor, and they're looking for a place to stay, and nobody will take them in part because they show up on this big weekend when all the undergraduates are arriving to Christminster, but also because they have children, and they don't have very much money, et cetera, and they're looking at the last minute. And so they find a place where there's room enough for Sue and for the children, but not Jude. So Jude goes off to find his own lodgings for the night. And Jude Jr. says, I wish Father was quite well and there had been room for him. Then it wouldn't matter so much. Poor Father. And then and then Sue says, it wouldn't. And Jude says, can I do anything? And Sue says, no, all is trouble adversity and suffering. This is not a good parenting strategy. He says, Father went away to give us children room, didn't he? Partly. It would be better to be out of the world then, wouldn't it? It would almost, dear. 'Tis because of us children too, isn't it, that you can't get good lodging? Well, people do object to children sometimes. Then if children make so much trouble, why do people have them? Oh, because it's a law of nature. But we don't ask to be born. No, indeed. What makes it worse with me is that you are not my real mother, and you needn't have me unless you liked. I oughtn't to have come to ye. That's the real truth. I trouble them in Australia, and I trouble folks here, and I wish I hadn't been born. You couldn't help it, my dear. My God, there's so many parenting mistakes in this. It's just tragic, right? I think whatever children be born that are not wanted, they should be killed directly before their souls come to them and not allowed to grow big and walk about. Sue did not reply. She doubtfully pondering how to treat this too reflective child. At last, she concluded that as far as circumstances permitted, she would be honest and candid with one who entered into her difficulties like an aged friend, right? And then she tells him she's going to have another child, and he goes ballistic. What the hell's the matter with you? You can't even take care of us. Why would you have another child? So I guess what we see here with Sue is a failing of sorts. I can only call it this, like her honesty is brutal here with Jude, right? I mean, what should she have said to Jude, do you think? Jude Jr., I'm talking about. Don't be shy, just unmute yourself.
I'd say probably nothing of what she did say.
Yes.
I feel like being a parent, you're supposed to like comfort children, and just when he said like I ought to not have been born, that was sad. You're
Yes.
supposed to like the parent's supposed to be like, no, like we want you here, like you
Yes.
weren't. There's a place for you. So
Yeah, that's right, Adriana. That's great. I think I think you're exactly right. That what Sue doesn't recognize is that not only is Jude a child and needs to be given the same protection and care. I mean, she gives him care, but this honesty that she has, this kind of brutal honesty, needs to be leavened somehow. It needs to be combined with an empathy and an understanding that he is A, traumatized already himself, and B, not yet ready to handle these kinds of truths. So it seems to me that it's her job here to not tell an untruth, but to just not answer the question so directly. And, can I do anything? No, sweetie, it's all going to be okay. I know it seems really sad right now, but I promise it will be okay. Father went away to give us children room, didn't he? No, it's not your fault. That's the thing you have to tell children, like, right? I mean, I remember when I was getting separated from my now ex-wife, it was like the people kept saying the kids are going to think it's their fault. And we're like, no, we told them so many times. It's like, you cannot tell them too many times. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. We're dummies. We can't do it. We failed. You're wonderful. We love you. We're here for you. It's got to be like that. So each time she just answers with this kind of brutal honesty. which is admirable, but not in these circumstances, Anybody else about this interaction?
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay. I was talking earlier and realized that my microphone wasn't working. So I was like, why can no one hear me? So my other thing too is, like, as a step parent or like a non-biological mom, it's important for them to say things like, you're a blessing, I'm happy to have you, I love you like my own. I know being a stepmom, I'm like, look, like, you're amazing. I love you just as much as if you were my biological kid, and make them feel like they're valued, because
Yes.
obviously her honesty is not coming across as being valued.
Yes, yes.
And he sounds young. So, I mean, it's one of those things where they don't quite comprehend everything that goes into it at that age.
I'm really glad you brought that up. I hadn't even thought about that there's also this aspect of, he knows she's not his birth mother. They've decided to wait to tell him who her real mother is. But you're absolutely right that there's this other aspect, which would make him feel, as he says himself here, what makes it worse is you are not my real mother, right? So she needs to say, instead of saying you couldn't help being born, dear, it's not your fault that you were born. It has to be more. Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for that. Anybody else on this section? Okay, I think I'm going to jump ahead to another issue because it's connected to this issue. And I'm going to kind of skip over the issue of superstition, omens, this kind of aspect. And we'll come back to it. I want to come down to this issue of let me just skip right to here. Let me just mention this one point. Remember that Jude told, that Phillotson told Jude at the very beginning of the novel to be kind to animals and children, right? And then Phillotson does not obey this rule. He tries, but when he doubles back and sort of coerces Sue to marry him, he then is unable to fulfill that basic kindness, right? To be kind to animals and children. So in a sense, and the reason he can rationalize it is because the church will be happier if he is not kind, right? Or if he does this thing. That socially, he's looked down upon and lost his job simply because he did something that was right. I have to point out something here that you might not know. Hardy and his wife could not have children. They tried very hard to have children. They were unable to have children. Hardy had a very difficult relationship with his wife. In the beginning, it was very loving. Later, it became less so. What happened is, I think there was disappointment that they couldn't have children. And there was also the fact that in the beginning, she helped him with his novels. And then at a certain point when he became pretty well known, like after the second or third novel, he said, I got it. I don't need your help anymore. He no longer talked to her about how the plot was developing, how the ideas were developing, which had been part of their relationship before. So he kind of took it back from her. I'm not trying to paint him as a bad person. I'm just trying to say that I think that his view of marriage is very dark. And it's partly because there were these issues in his marriage that he couldn't work out. And maybe he would have liked to have divorced her. I mean, I don't know if I told you this, but the ironic thing is that when she finally died, not too many years after this novel was published. And they had been living in they'd still been vacationing together, but they'd lived in separate floors of the house and such. When she died, he fell to pieces, and he wrote all these poems about her and how much he loved her as a young woman. So it was very, very interesting. He's a very interesting, complex figure. And I think that built into this business of children is the fact that he didn't have children of his own. And I think he wanted them very much so. All right. All right, so now I want to go, I wrote painting the Ten Commandments and other omens. So I sort of want to talk about these signs that Hardy throws up, and we'll just talk about them briefly because I don't think that they're super important, but they represent something for both Jude and Sue. In the beginning, it's mostly for Jude, and then later Sue becomes super superstitious, especially after the death of the children. All right, so this is when they are they're painting the Ten Commandments. It's part 5, chapter 6. So yes, okay. So they're trying to find, they were just thinking they had to leave and they didn't have good work when somebody came to the door, and this happens all the time in Hardy novels, knock, knock. Guess what? Would you like to restore this church? And this is something Hardy was actually himself really obsessive about, was the restoration of these old medieval churches. And so they said yes. So in these old medieval churches, many of them, you would have at the front of the church, you would have, of course, the cross, right? And sometimes, depending on how reformed it was, you might have a crucifix. At the back of the church would be the printing of the Ten Commandments. This would never happen later, I don't think, but it happened then. So they were restoring these, and these women who were gossiping about whether Jude and Sue were really married tell this story. And here's the story. And so it's in dialect. I'm not going to do the dialect, right? I can't do it. It's a kind of, I was talking to my friend who's English and from this part of the country, from Bath. And he told me 2 things that were interesting. I was talking to him over the weekend. He said when he went to Oxford, he said, I felt exactly like Jude. I read it and it made me sick to my stomach. And he went to Oxford a long time ago. And he was like, it made me, I read it, but I felt exactly like Jude. I felt like I didn't fit in, even though he was, an honor student at Oxford, but he still felt like he didn't fit. But the other thing he told me was that these accents are very particular, and this part of the country is very particular, and they are very, very proud of their heritage, So I can't do the dialect, all right. Well, now, it's a curious thing, but my grandfather told me a strange tale of a most immoral case that happened at the painting of the commandments in a church out by Gaymead, which is quite within a walk of this one. In them days, commandments were mostly done in gilt letters on black ground, and that's how they were out there, I say, before the old church was rebuilded. It must have been somewhere about 100 years ago that them commandments wanted doing up, just as ours do here, and they had to get men from Albercombe to do them. Now they wished to get the job finished by a particular Sunday, so the men had to work late Saturday night against their will, for overtime was not paid then as 'tis now. There was no true religion in the country at that date, neither among parsons, clerks, nor people, and to keep the men up to their work, the vicar had them let them have plenty of drink during the afternoon. As evening dawned on, they sent for more themselves, rum by all account. It got later and later, and they got more and more fuddled. That's a word that Hardy likes. He uses it later to describe Jude and Sue when I'm Jude and Arabella when Jude is drunk. They got more and more fuddled till at last they were putting their rum bottle and rummers up to the communion table and drawing up a trestle or two and sat round comfortable, pouring out again, right hearty bumpers. So this is kind of sacrilegious, using the communion table to sit and get drunk at, right? No sooner had they tossed off their glasses than, as the story goes, they fell down senseless, one and all. How long they bode so, they didn't know, but when they came to themselves, there was a terrible thunderstorm raging, and they seemed to see in the gloom a dark figure with very thin legs and a curious voot standing on the ladder finishing their work. When it got daylight, they can see that their work was finished and couldn't at all mind finishing it themselves. They went home, and the next thing they heard was a great scandal that had been caused in the church that Sunday morning. For when the people came and the church service began, they all saw that the 10 Commandments was painted with the knots left out. So in other words, thou shalt not kill became thou shalt kill, right? Thou shalt commit adultery. Decent people wouldn't attend service there for a long time. And that's the tale, right? And the church had to be reconsecrated. So why did I take so much time talking about this? Because these were the ideological things that Sue and Jude kept bumping up against. This kind of idea that literally there would be a curse or an omen or something that they brought into the community and would damage the community. So that's the story that's told in order to keep people sort of following these rules, is that if you do not follow these rules, this is what could happen. Well, right after this happened, they lost their jobs, right? So they were told, sorry, you do great work. You know, remember she had been trained in calligraphy. That's what she was doing when he first met her in Christminster. And he, of course, was a stonemason. So he's repairing the stones and doing the chiseling, and she's doing the lettering in the gold gilds. And so they're kicked out. The second one happens much later when Jude is starting to, when Sue is starting to become so sad that she becomes hyper-religious. So struck with grief that she becomes hyper-religious, and she talks about the curse of Adam, and they need to mortify their flesh. They need to, that she deserved to have her children killed, which is something she said later. And later she says, I'm glad my kids died. It's very, very harsh stuff, right? And then finally, when Jude is very drunk, remember Arabella gets him drunk and then keeps him drunk so she can get him to marry her. He crosses by the martyr's burning place. And this is another omen that he will be, that he's being martyred, right? That he is, right? So I just wanted to mention these kind of like little moments in here where you get this ideology of superstition. And omen, these and omens and curses and love potions and different kinds of like supernatural things that help to keep people afraid. All right, so finally, I want to talk, well, not finally, but almost finally, I want to talk about the breakdown of the bond between Jude and Sue. And what happens here is, in my opinion, the utter collapse of their attempt at a kind of new humanism. And I'll talk a little bit about an idea that was being formed right about the time this novel was getting published. It didn't come out until until the 1910s, this essay, but Freud was starting to come up with his ideas of mourning and melancholia, which became an important essay that came out in the late 1910s, but he was conceiving all of these ideas in the 1890s. So what he says is that, what Jude says after the death of the children is that what bothers him more than anything else is that Sue, remember the synchronicity we talked about between Sue and Jude? It now was broken, and Sue were mentally traveling in opposite directions. So this is a part, he says, since the tragedies, events which had enlarged his own views of life. So in other words, the tragedy made him see that not that it was his fault, but that it was society's fault, sort of led her to think, she began to think it was her fault. He began to see, well, not that it's not his fault at all, but that it's something, that horrible stuff happens under horrible circumstances, right? She was no longer the same as in her independent days, right? All right, so this is the part I wanted to talk to you for a second about mourning and melancholia, and pay attention because this will probably come up on a quiz somewhere, this differentiation between mourning and melancholia. So what happens when, according to Freud in this famous essay, is that when you lose something or someone or some ideal, you go into a period of sadness, which is mourning, right? Grief. And I don't know, let's say that you, this is a very dear one to me. I don't know why this is so hard, but you lose a pet, right? You lose a pet, and if the mourning happens in a kind of natural way, then you experience grief, right? You experience an inability at first to connect with another object. You have no desire to get another pet, or you have no desire to take on a new hobby, or you have no desire to do whatever. You're just sad. Don't try to make me feel better. I just feel sad. And the ego protects itself by holding on to the object, by looking at pictures of the dog, remembering it, walking the same trails you used to walk with the dog, whatever. One difference, though, between mourning and melancholia is that in regular mourning, you don't blame yourself for the loss. So, but there's this other phenomena that happens, which is related to mourning, which is called melancholia, according to Freud. And what happens in melancholia is you get the same grief, but then you have the same initial inability to connect with another object, but then it becomes total. You never connect, you cannot connect with another object. All of the connections you have with another object, let's say, and by an object, I mean a person, place, thing, idea. It doesn't have to be, I'm not talking about like a paperweight. It can be a human being or a pet or another, whatever. So let's say you're married and you go through a divorce, or you're engaged and you have a breakup. In the mourning process, you wouldn't start dating right away. That would be kind of weird. You'd go through all the mourning of it. And then when you were able to go on and date someone else, you would have worked through what happened in that first relationship, and you wouldn't torture the new person. Are you going to leave me? Do you really love me? You see, in a sense, if you've done that, you haven't really taken on the new object. Then you're in melancholia, right? You're still traumatized by that early thing, and you're constantly thinking about it. And Freud has this beautiful phrase, the shadow of the object falls across the ego. So this is what happens in melancholia, is that the object and the ego kind of merge. So on the one hand, psychically, it's kind of like you never lost your mother or your dog or whatever, because you're always thinking about them, but you're unable to move on and form other bonds. And also you have this self-blame. And it seems to me that that's what Sue does. Jude is here, right? And Sue is here. That's the way I understand it. Now, it's a little bit maybe too on the nose, and maybe it's more complicated than that, but that's basically the way I want to sort of think about it. They each take one of these two positions, and it makes it very difficult for them to, I will tell you a story about someone that I know them very well, and they had a baby die of infant death syndrome. And they also had a beautiful Afghan hound dog, this couple. They were so grief-stricken that after the baby died, they forgot to watch out for the dog, and they left it open, and the dog ran off. And you see, what I'm suggesting here is that they were in a period where, and I happen to know in this case, there was some self-blame that happened because they were both smokers. And I think infant death syndrome sometimes can be complicated by smoking, secondhand smoke. And this is a long time ago. So, but anyway, I just wanted to give you that idea of, like, you don't care enough that you just you almost injure yourself more. You hurt yourself more through the grief. And that's what Sue does. Sue loves Jude more than anyone. And she's like, no, I refuse to be with you. Right? I'm going back to Richard. And then there's this section where I wanted to connect this: you shan't learn, you shan't labor, and you shan't love. When she says it, and this is at a different point, what I think she's saying when she says external, I think she's saying, and she's still in her kind of right mind here, she's saying that there are these, something external means something in the society and culture, right? And I think what you need to remember here is this language follows pretty closely after the 12 commandments, right? I think it's hard not to read this as a kind of ironic take on that, like new commandments for a socially messed up world, right? For Jude, right? You can't learn. You're not allowed to go to Oxford because of your class position. You can't labor. You're not allowed to work for us because you're illegitimately married or not married and living with someone. And you shan't love. These children die. You can't even have the children, right? You can't even have a full family. But at this point, she's able to see it as external. Later, she will see it as internal. You see the difference? Later, she will see it's all her fault. Here, she's still able to recognize, and usually these things are a blend of internal and external, right? I mean, usually, not that she's to blame, but maybe they shouldn't ever have gone back to Christminster, which is what she said. Jude's ego and desire to be among the books and all that might have been a big mistake, right? And then finally here, she says, we must conform, right? It's no use fighting against God. And then Jude says, no, we're fighting against man and senseless circumstance. Because that is something we have to face sometimes, like in the case of my friend, babies just die and it's nobody's fault, right? And she understands it at this point, but she loses that ability to hear Jude when he says this after a while. And Jude has become a disciple of Sue's. He's learned what she taught him, which is that it's not right to blame the self in these situations. It's better to see that there's a system that doesn't work, right? So let's talk about the three characters that are dealing with their suffering, right? So I'm going to return to this question of suffering, right? And remember, I've said this to you before, like, so does anybody know this? I think it's called the Three Noble Truths. It's in Buddhism. The first truth is that all beings suffer. The second truth is that, the cause of suffering is attachment and aversion. And then it is possible to end suffering. Right? These are the three noble truths in Buddhism. And don't worry, I'm not a Buddhist, I'm not a Christian, or whatever. But I like all these things, and I have studied both of them a bit. And I meditate, but I'm not a Buddhist. All right, so these are the three noble truths. So the question is, I hate when I do that. You saw them, right? I'll retype them later. The three noble truths. There's no way to redo that, is there? Undo change of text. Ah, there it is. Good. I'm not trying to say that there's anything about this, but suffering just happens. It's just part of life, right? And so what did these characters do with their suffering? Sue trades her suffering for religious certainty, self-blame, self-denial. And I'm not saying Sue's at fault here. Any one of us, including me, I don't even know how I would deal if this happened to my children. I probably would. I don't even know what I would do. I couldn't make it. I don't know what I would do. Jude trades his suffering for drink. I think that's fair to say. Both his initial suffering, that's what he does, but he doesn't blame himself, and he doesn't mortify the flesh and force himself into horrible situations. He only marries Arabella because he's drunk as hell. And Phillotson trades his suffering for a theory of social Darwinism, which I'll get to in a minute. And I was sort of wanting to come back to this concept that we've talked about in class. In one sense, what's missing is negative capability, which means that in order to have negative capability, you have to come back to this point that all beings suffer. So if you have an understanding that all beings suffer, then you don't ask yourself, what did I do to cause this suffering? You see what I mean? A certain amount of negative capability is helpful. Phillotson says, what did I do to for this to happen? And he goes, oh, I should never have let Sue go. That was my fault. That's why I can't get work anymore. And that's why all this went bad. Jude says, I didn't do anything. I'm just going to get drunk. It's just horrible. And now I've lost Sue. And Sue says, I must be a sinner. And I must need to conform to the laws of God. So Phillotson, I say, cages Sue, the bird. Remember, I'm calling her a bird because he refers to her as a bird. Remember, she had a little nest inside of his house that she would sleep in when they were first married. And then also she lets her pigeons go at the end. So neither Phillotson nor Arabella can have empathy with animals and children the way that Jude and Sue can. But in the end, Sue can't. She's beaten by her grief. Okay, so before I go on and talk about social Darwinism, which will be the last thing I talk about, well, I think I call it social evolution, but as opposed to social Darwinism, right? So are there any questions about anything I've said so far, or things that are confusing or comments.
So I just have one question for the 4 truths, or well, you said 3 truths, but I thought that there was a 4th one, something about like the path that you have to take in order to get to the truth.
Yeah, so what those are, that's the,
I mean, I could
I
be
can't
wrong.
remember how many it is. No, you're right. But I can't, but it is not one of the 3 noble, or there, oh, you're right. You're right. There are 4 noble truths. The 4th,
I just remember there being something
the
about
4th,
like
wait,
you have
wait.
to take a journey.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
you have
yeah,
to
yeah,
take
yeah,
a
yeah.
path
Thank you,
to
thank
get
you,
to the truth.
thank you. The 4th noble truth is is it the 5-fold path or the 7-fold path?
8-fold.
8-fold.
I think.
Okay,
Because
okay,
I just remember it being double what the truth number
okay.
was.
8-fold path.
Maybe.
It's the way. Okay, there it is. Thank you so much for that. Boy, talk about a bad Buddhist. So 4 noble truths, the cause of
I
suffering,
studied it for a
attachment, and
little
aversion.
bit.
That's good. Thank you so much. The 8-fold path is the way. I knew there was the 8-fold path, and the 8-fold path is right speech, right this, right livelihood, right action, all these sorts of things. Thank you so much. All right. So let's talk then. Other questions or corrections? That's what I get for being an armchair Buddhist.
I'm an armchair Buddhist too. It's fine.
I'm actually low-key scared. I used to go to the hear this so-called well, I've not so-called. He was an incarnated Lama give this talk, and I would sit way in the back because I was afraid of his power. Like I don't believe in it, but I was afraid of it. So that tells you how weird I am. All right, the final section on social evolution. Let's just do this, and we'll have our weekend to look forward to. But please read the novel if you haven't finished it, because there'll be questions on the quiz that will be much easier if you've read. All right, social evolution. We're back to this question of humanism versus nature. So Sue, before she's defeated completely, she understands that what their problem is not so much that what they're thinking is wrong, but it's just kind of ahead of its time, right? So that's what she says here. She says, actually, everybody thinks there should be more freedom. Remember Mrs. Edlin, who's old, she's like, why does marriage have to be so stupid? Why can't people just be together and love who they love, right? So that's an example of this. This is a very strong claim for humanism versus nature. And by nature, I should say that I'm talking about kind of 2 different things here. There's this quote from Tennyson that is, nature red in tooth and claw. And what Tennyson is talking about is this kind of idea that Darwin shows us that nature is actually this violence, right? That nature has this violent aspect to it, like, a bird of prey sweeping down to capture a bunny or something, right? So, so that's fair enough, but and it's that nature I think I want to talk about. I don't really believe that nature. I think there are problems with that, but we'll just move on for now. I just wanted to clarify that. And this is from a Tennyson poem. So Jude says to the crowd in Christminster, he's quite weak still from being sick, and they've arrived in Christminster, and he says, somebody recognizes him and says, I thought you were going to go away and become famous. And meanwhile, all these undergraduates are coming in and all these people are graduating, and he's back in the same place, and he's almost like, feels like he needs to preach. So it's almost like he's part preacher, part, returning, Tinker Tailor is there. I forget the name of the other person, something Skaggs or Skiggs or something. These other folks that had been, they recognize him. And Jude says about why he had failed, or what it meant that he hadn't gone off and become a great scholar or a great clergy person, but was still a stonemason. He says, it's a difficult question, my friends, for any young man, the question I had to grapple with, in which thousands are weighing at the present moment in these uprising times. Whether to follow uncritically the track he finds himself in. I'll be a farmer, my father was a farmer, I'll be a stonemason, there's a place right here, I'll work in the factory, it opened down the street, I'm okay being, whatever, I'm okay following along being an electrician like my uncle, whatever it is, without considering his aptness for it, or to consider what his aptness or bent might be. So suddenly we're talking about a certain class fluidity, right? The ability to move up and down and move up in class if you want to, right? If you have the knack for it, why not? Why not become, say, why not move up in class if you have a talent for the law, for example, right? And what they find are there are structural impediments. That's what Jude finds, right? I tried to do the latter, to move up, but I failed. But I don't admit that my failure proved my view to be a wrong one, or that my success would make it a right one. Though that's how we appraise such attempts nowadays. I mean, not by their essential soundness, but by their accidental outcomes. So I want to connect this argument here to the death of the children. There was something in Jude Jr. that was broken and hurt and traumatized from the beginning. And maybe it just happens. So this is one that would say something like contingency, chance, chaos, all of these things could contribute, right? And you need negative capability to be able to deal with it. These might be the same as accidental outcomes. So it doesn't mean Jude was a failure for studying and learning all that stuff that he did. And it doesn't mean that their little happy family was a bad idea or was sinful or wrong. It just means that really bad things can happen sometimes. And I think Jude is really smart in sort of pointing about this, right? And he says, finally, however, it was my poverty and not my will that consented to be beaten. It takes 2 or 3 generations to do what I tried to do in one. And my impulses, affections, vices, perhaps they should be called, like Sue might be a vice, were too strong not to hamper a man without advantages, right? I couldn't deal with them because I didn't have the advantages, right? All right, so I think that this novel has a strange kind of darkness, but almost a hopefulness for the future, that future generations will be able to accomplish this, this moving towards humanism. This is what bothers me and worries me a little bit about where the university system has gotten. And that is that I would like all of you guys to take classes in poetry, philosophy, art history, sociology, history, all of these things, just to learn more about the world and yourselves and the world. But you're very much right. I'm right. You're very much told you should get into your track and be thinking about what you're going to make your living at. So the university becomes not so much a place of broadening and humanist values, but kind of about job training, right? And even if you're an English major, you're told, well, what will you do with your English degree? I want to be an editor. I want to be this, which is all good. It's important. We have to think about them. I did, I was lucky enough to be able to take some other classes along the way, and I was older, but whatever. There is that kind of pressure. So I think this novel has an interesting view of education, but also of social Darwinism and the possibilities to move up. All right, so, I mean, we know that does anybody have more things than that they would like to say, or questions? But we could, we know we end with Jude's death, and we see Arabella. I don't know, I think Thomas Hardy is, sometimes he can just be mean to characters. I mean, Arabella is just a complete jerk at the end of this. Maybe that's just who she is, but I don't know.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Where was the quote, "The shadow of the object falls across the ego"? Where was that from again?
That's from a text called Mourning and Melancholia. And if you look at your terms and concepts list, it's one that hasn't been yellowed yet. So it might have a better explanation than the one I've been able to put forward to you today. I mean, I wrote it, but it might be clearer than what I said today. I think the year for Mourning and Melancholia is sometime around 1819 when it was published. I'm sorry, 1918. Other questions? All right, well, we move on to happier reading here forward. I will tell you that the text that I had in place of this, James Joyce's Dubliners, is also very dark. So it's not like I traded a light one for a dark one, but in any case, I'm super glad that we were able to read it, and I look forward. Don't forget to contact me if you want to have a paper conference with me, okay? Otherwise, I'll say goodbye for today, and you guys have a nice weekend, okay? All right, bye.